All right, my newest episode on the Joe Rogan Experience dropped yesterday, and I had a great time on the show. Second time doing the show, and Joe loved the film. Am I racist? He gave us his endorsement. So if you're a big Joe Rogan fan, you heard it from the man himself. He said it's a very funny movie. He said, in fact, it was one of the funniest movies he's seen in a long time. So, you should more incentive to go out and buy a ticket. And we talked about that for a while. We talked about the film, and I appreciated that. And then the conversation verged into the moon landing conspiracy, which has very little to do with the movie. In fact, probably nothing at all. And that's okay, actually, because I thought it was a fascinating conversation. I enjoyed it. And I have to tell you, I've been listening to the Joe Rogan's podcast for, 10 years. And this has been one of my professional ambitions now for probably a decade, is to go on Joe Rogan's show and talk about something like that. Talk about aliens, talk about moon landing, something in that vein. The first time I did the show, we didn't get into any of that kind of stuff. And so I was actually happy. I'm like, yes, this is my great ambition, is to talk about this kind of thing on this show. So it was great. And I was the one who sort of brought it up. I brought it up as an aside in some other context. We were talking about flat Earth. Okay, so that's another thing. We're talking about flat Earth theory, which Joe's not a flat Earth guy. And then I mentioned the moon landing conspiracy theory as an aside. I thought that Joe was a moon landing believer like I am. I know he had a joke in his Netflix special recently about denying the moon landing. I wasn't sure if that reflected his actual views. And we talked about it. It turns out that, as he explained, he doesn't outright deny the moon landing, but he is much more open to the possibility that it is a hoax than he was in the past. So I'll play a little bit of that conversation. But this went on, like I said, for like an hour. I think it's worth going and watching the whole thing. But this is about 2.5 minutes of that exchange. Here it is.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
You're the moon landing. You're not you believe in the moon landing, right?
I used to believe in the moon landing.
You don't anymore?
I had a joke in my act about it, that before COVID, I would have told you vaccines the most important invention in human history. And after COVID, I'm like, I don't think we went to the moon.
Yeah, I know that was in your, but yeah. you actually think that?
I think there is a less than zero possibility that we did not go to the moon.
Oh my gosh.
I know. Why do you think we went to the moon?
Because it's exactly what you just said about, well, there's a lot of reasons, but the main thing is what you just said about the Earth. The vastness of the conspiracy that would be required to fake that, it's so vast that it's a lot more incredible to believe that we faked it than to believe that we just went. And going to the moon, it's a massive achievement, but I think the greatest human achievement of all time. But even so, to fake it would be even more massive, because not only would you need all of these space agencies and all the different whatever people in American institutions to be colluding, but you'd also need foreign governments, including adversarial foreign governments, who at this point certainly would know we faked it, and for some reason haven't blown the lid on it. So they're letting us take this achievement that they know. Like, why haven't the Russians come out and said
all those things you're saying are true? Right. I don't argue with any of the things you're saying, but one of the things that I think you have to consider was, if it's not possible for human beings to safely go through the Van Allen radiation belts and out into deep space without much protection and face the temperatures that are on the surface of the moon, which get up to 250 degrees and 250 degrees below zero in the shadows. There's no environment there. It's hostile beyond belief. Micrometeorites are flying into the moon all the time. They're flying through space all the time. We've never had a single biological organism go out into deep space, past the Van Allen radiation belts, and then come back to Earth and come back alive, except human beings during the Apollo missions.
Saying that it was a hoax is an assertion of it's not you're not just denying an event, you're asserting a whole other event that you say happened instead. And there is evidence that we went to the moon. Now, someone who's a skeptic might say it's not enough evidence or it's not good evidence. There's evidence. There's eyewitness. There's people that went and came back and told us. There's footage. There's a lot. Okay. There is evidence.
Okay.
But there's no evidence of the hoax. No one has come and said, here's my affirmative evidence that this hoax happened. It's never happened. Okay, so I kind of gave myself the last word in that clip. Like I said, the conversation goes on for an hour, so you have to watch the whole thing. But I think it's a pretty fair summary. Joe's primary issue, his main bone of contention, is though not only, his main is the Van Allen radiation belt, which he says humans might not be able to cross. And my main rebuttal, as you just heard, is that there is strong evidence we went to the moon. Meanwhile, there is precisely zero evidence of the hoax. So, and I just want to expand on that for a moment. Because in case after watching the Rogan episode, you haven't heard me say enough on this topic already, I think I made this point pretty clearly on the show. I returned to it several times, but the main thing is this, again, there is evidence of the moon landing, really good evidence. And yet there is no evidence of a hoax. And as I tried to argue, the moon landing hoax is an event. Right? If it happened, it's an event. It is a thing that happened. It's not simply the absence of an event. So if you deny that the moon landing happened, you're not simply denying that a thing happened. You are asserting some other thing that you say happened instead of the thing that we all think happened. Staging the moon landing and all of that, right? There was a thing that they did. And yet, this to me, I think is really kind of decisive in this argument. None of the skeptics have ever presented a single shred of evidence of that event occurring. Okay, so to be very clear about this, to look at the evidence of the moon landing and to pick it apart and say, well, this evidence isn't compelling enough, that is not evidence of the hoax. That is, at best, you are succeeding in calling into question some of the evidence of this other event, which I don't think you succeed even in doing that. And now there's police cars going by. Maybe they're going after someone who just probably made a deceptive meme, probably. Maybe they're coming for me right now. Okay, good. I don't want to cut any of this out. I want to keep all this in. This is what's wonderful about doing a podcast in a hotel room. Anyway, as I was saying, even if you succeed in pointing to weaknesses in the evidence of the moon landing hoax, which I don't think that the skeptics do succeed in that, you still have not provided positive, affirmative evidence of the event that you are asserting happened instead. And so you've got this event over here where there's a whole bunch of evidence, okay? And then you got your event that you claim happened, that you have zero evidence, none. Now, what would the evidence of the moon landing hoax be? Okay, not evidence that the evidence of the moon landing is not good. I'm not talking about that evidence. What kind of evidence could you possibly present to prove that this hoax happened? And, well, I don't know. I mean, that's kind of up to you. That's your burden of proof, not mine. But even something like somebody who was involved in it blowing the whistle, somebody coming out and saying, hey, I was there when this hoax happened, or even I talked to the guy who was there when it happened. Now that would not be good evidence. That'd be still pretty weak. If all you could do is say, well, yeah, I talked to a guy who was there, or I talked to a guy who talked to a guy. But we don't even have that. And we certainly don't have any firsthand eyewitness testimony. Because guess what? Firsthand eyewitness testimony is evidence. It's not proof. It's not proof, but that is evidence. It's just like it's evidence in a crime. Eyewitness testimony can be wrong. We know that, but it's evidence. I mean, you certainly, if a prosecutor has eyewitness testimony that somebody killed a guy, you're going to bring that person in and they're going to testify in court. Of course they are, because it's evidence. If it's the only evidence you have, it's probably not going to be enough. But if it goes along with other pieces of evidence, then you got a pretty strong case. Well, over here, there's no physical evidence of any kind of this hoax happening. You know, no one's ever found whatever the site where they staged the moon landing or something. That's never happened. But you also don't even have the eyewitness testimony. And that's kind of what I was getting at with Joe also, that you're not only asserting this event, but you're asserting a conspiracy where everybody that involved, hundreds of people probably. I mean, there's hundreds of people who were involved in the conspiracy and or would have to have direct knowledge of it, right, in order for this to happen. And yet we've heard nothing from any of them. Decades and decades have passed. And so you've got all these people who work together on this conspiracy, all these people who have knowledge of it. None of them have said a word, not one word ever in decades. That's pretty incredible. And I say incredible in the most literal sense. It's just very hard to believe. So I still stand there. I'm still a full-time, full-on moon landing believer, but I did enjoy the conversation. Hey, YouTube, thanks for listening to the show. If you'd like access to my full show with no ads, you should go to dailywire.com and use promo code Walsh to get 2 months free on all annual plans. See you there.